Hello everyone, welcome to Azure On Air. Today, in this episode, we have got an exciting person who's very knowledgeable in the field of Azure. Yeah, so today we have got Mustafa Toroman, who's an experienced principal architect with a demonstrated history of working in the Microsoft industry, and also he's skilled in cloud computing, Microsoft Azure, SQL Server, data migration, DevOps, and apart from this, he's also much interested in public speaking, which also gained him the MVP, and he has sustained it since 2016. And he's also an author, which we will be talking about in this podcast as well. And today we have got Mustafa to talk about Azure Cloud Adoption Framework. So happy to have you on our show, Mustafa.
Well, basically, a lot of companies started using cloud in some regard. Some services started moving their applications there, and very soon it became chaotic, right? It became something that you don't have control over anymore. Chaotic environment that you have no governance, no control over. People are just building stuff, piling stuff up. Security becomes a problem, especially in today's world. Like cybersecurity is probably the topic number one in IT. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So Mustafa, like when we were discussing prior the broadcast, we just had a discussion about the topic, and in that case, you just gave me Azure CAF. And what is the reason that you gave me Azure CAF? Because we would like to know what is Azure CAF in the first place.
Well, cloud adoption framework itself came out of the need to give companies some guidelines how to approach cloud in a right way. Um, when we start discussing cloud adoption framework, we need to address the framework part first, right? Because um, what is the framework to begin with? So basically, when we look at the traditional frameworks in IT, they are basically a foundation, something that gives you a solid structure, solid ground to build upon, right? And it helps you to have some structure around it and speed up your processes, right? uh, just look like traditional frameworks, whatever it is, from Angular, .NET, Ruby on Rails. It's basically there's a programming language in the background that elevates certain structure of the framework and speeds up the process. With cloud adoption framework, we are trying to do the same. Why? Well, basically, a lot of companies started using cloud in some regard. Some services started moving their applications there, and very soon it became chaotic, right? It became something that you don't have control over anymore. And then the need for cloud adoption framework came out. Now the differences between the traditional framework, when we compare it to the .NET, is basically that we don't get the finished framework out of the box. What cloud adoption framework brings you is a set of guidelines that help you build your own cloud adoption framework and create your own foundation that you can build upon and use cloud in a good, in a proper way.
Amazing. So, when you said this, I would also like to know how does this implementation of cloud adoption framework work?
Well, as I said, this is something very. When you look at it, it can look very vague because it doesn't have a checklist that you say, okay, you do these 10 things, you have your own cloud adoption framework, you implement the cloud on your own. Compared to the traditional framework, this is more of something that you need to build for yourself. It's something that every organization needs to do on their own and figure out how they fit in this cloud bubble, how cloud should look for them. Uh, um, this is maybe why it's very hard to implement, but it's also very important to have a good and proper way. I would like to take a step back and like just remember a couple of cloud situations I've encountered in the past. Very often people decided, okay, cloud is a new good shiny thing, it's cool, let's go to the cloud. And then organization goes there and people start building stuff and very soon it can happen that the bills are exceeding all the expectation. You have no idea why are you getting those bills, what are the services in there, and it becomes a jungle. So it becomes a problem from the FinOps perspective, that you don't have entire control of what you're spending, and why are you spending all that money to begin with. The second part is that you don't have a proper insight in what is actually used and what are just the experiments, or leftovers for something from something, and etc. Because especially in the IT industry, turnover of people is incredible. People join and leave companies all the time. And if someone creates certain set of resources, you're paying for it, but it can happen very quickly that no one has an idea why those resources exist, or are they in use. Are you free to remove them, or is there something depending on them? So it's becoming a chaotic environment that you have no governance, no control over. People are just building stuff, piling stuff up. Security becomes a problem, especially in today's world. Like cybersecurity is probably the topic number one in IT. Um, and from this need, we need some kind of structure on the ground, as I mentioned before, that we need to build so we can have this control, have this insight, information about what is in there, how it's used, why it's used, and etc. And it's very specific, that there's no silver bullet that you can just say, as I said, these 10 check, you have this checklist, 10 bullet points, you do this, you're done, you implemented it successfully. Every organization needs to figure on their own what is their cloud journey, and what is actually that they require from the cloud, so they can build their own framework that's going to be useful for them in the future. Because if you just try to adopt someone else's strategy, it will probably not fit you, and you will essentially fail, and then you will encounter all the problems you would have without platform to begin with. So it's very important to uh, have a good idea what you want to do, and how to start with.
Okay. So, you just spoke about having the migration phase, right? People who are in the migration phase, who are planning to move into cloud. What is their take on this cloud adoption framework? Have you worked with people like that?
Absolutely. Like most of the companies start with some kind of migration, right? So there are a couple of things. So I'm going to step out of the cloud adoption framework for a second when I'm discussing migration, because um, it doesn't necessarily have to be migration related. It obviously can, because cloud adoption framework gives you entire platform for the entire cloud. So it doesn't really matter if you're migrating things, or if you're developing cloud native applications that are born in the cloud. You should have a foundation that's gonna support both. But obviously, there's also a thing that cloud adoption framework evolves over time. And basically you can start in one direction, but you can adapt and change over time to something else. So if you're just focusing on migration, you can start with cloud adoption framework part, and focus on this particular capsule for the time being, and focus on what is required, what do you need for successful migration. Now, speaking of migration itself, I do have a couple of tips there. The worst part of the migration, the worst scenario for any migration that you do, is to do a lift and shift, because it doesn't provide, first of all, it doesn't provide any value. Because if you want to leverage what cloud offers, you want the good stuff, you want the cool stuff, you want platform as a service services, so that you don't have to deal with the updates and patching and everything else. But also platform as a service helps you with the scalability, self-healing, auto restarts. All the cool stuff is there. So you really want to focus on the more cloud native stuff and get most out of the cloud. Now, running virtual machines, as I said, lift and shift is the last option, but still there are better and worse options in there as well. If you do a lift and shift, you basically collect all the garbage and all the issues that you had on prem and move them to the cloud. So you end up with the same mess you had in your on-prem data center in the cloud. If you are forced to use virtual machines and there's no other option, because it is a scenario sometimes, it's speed and time that's pressing you. You need to get out of the data center very quickly, so you don't have time to re-architecture everything, refactor applications, etc. Then it's still fine. You can use a virtual machine as a first stepping stone, but you need to keep in mind that you need to go cloud native along the way. You should not have that as a long term solution. However, when you're moving a virtual machine, you should try to rehost. So basically, that means creating a blank virtual machine in the cloud and then move what is actually required, move the applications and things that you actually need, rather than just lifting and doing the lift and shift. That will basically bring everything you had on that virtual machine, including the garbage and things that are not desired, they will end up in the cloud as well. So that's the worst scenario you can actually do.
So, in that case, like we just spoke about how it works for the people who are moving into Azure, then I would also like to know currently in the market, which specific domains are more into the CF category, who are adopting this more?
Well, currently we are seeing a lot of traffic there. A lot of companies are there. Now, when we look at the cloud adoption in general, we've seen that small companies were more inclined to do that in the past. And they also rushed to the cloud. They didn't have any proper way of doing things, and they desperately needed cloud adoption framework because it was a jungle out there, and they had no control over their environment. Compared to them, enterprise companies are more careful when doing stuff, right? So there are a lot of enterprise companies are stepping into the cloud. A lot of them use it in some extent, but they also are relying to build a cloud adoption framework before doing anything serious. So I think everyone and all the industries, all the sizes of organizations are working around it. I just think the motivation and the way they do it is a little bit different. As I said, smaller companies are already there, but it's a mess. So they need cloud adoption framework to fix them, to help them gain control of what they have. Whereas enterprise organizations are more focused on creating cloud adoption framework before they begin their journey and start putting serious workloads that business depends on in the cloud.
So, so that's a lot of information that we had for the domains that are using it, and I would also like to understand if there are any tools that would contribute to this specific cloud adoption framework.
Yeah, there are several things that can help you. To address that question, I need to take a step back and look at a couple of steps that we need to do for the good cloud adoption framework adoption. So cloud adoption framework, if we want to do the things the right way, we need to define a strategy. We need to define why are we going to the cloud to begin with. What is our business justification? Because I've seen it many times that companies just decide to go to the cloud. They said, okay, everyone is doing this. Let's go. Let's move. Let's do it ourselves. Uh, and then it fails because you don't have a good solid understanding on what you're doing and why you're it doing it in the first place. So with the cloud adoption framework, we need to understand what is our business justification, what are the issues that we are trying to resolve, and how will we resolve those issues by moving to the cloud. It can be many different things. Like cloud offers so much possibilities, but we need to be aware what are those possibilities and understand how they can help us improve our business. And then when we know what we are trying to achieve and we have expected outcomes, it's a good strategy and a good move to go to the cloud. But it doesn't end there. We need to have a proper plan. How are we going to do it? How are we doing this, and how should we align all our plans and outcomes, how to do it. We also need to get ready. Just moving stuff to the cloud is going to be a fail if we don't have everything ready to begin with. We need to get people ready. We need to upskill our people. So is when we decide to go to the cloud, is our IT department ready? Do they know how to use cloud? Do they have any cloud skills? It's very important. It's also important to address processes and changes and everything, because how we did things in the on-prem data center and how we're doing it in the cloud is going to be very different. So we need to adjust our processes to reflect cloud way of doing things. And then we can start discussing adoption phase, where we migrate, innovate, how do we implement those things. And finally, at the end, we need to have ability to govern and manage everything that is in our cloud. So to achieve those goals, there are several very cool tools from Microsoft that we can use. First one will be Cloud Journey Tracker, that can help you identify your cloud adoption needs and give you some kind of recommendations on what you need to do. There's also strategic migration assessment and readiness tool to help you get prepared, how to implement cloud migration at scale, how to adjust your journey. And finally, we have a governance benchmark that can help you identify where are your gaps, what do you need to improve in order to have a full governance and ability to manage your cloud environments.
Okay, so that's a lot of information that we had for the podcast regarding the Azure CAF, its implementation, uses, and where it's been very accurate for your adoption framework. Yeah, and then followed by that, we also got to know that you are an author of an award-winning book. Can you just explain us about your book? Can you give an intro about it?
My author career started a few years back when I got a proposition to do a book that was called Hands-on Cloud Administration in Azure. And it was a huge success, and it gave me a huge push and motivation to continue doing that, to continue writing, to continue publishing stuff. And so far, I did 9 books, uh, all of them about cloud computing, about Azure, Microsoft Azure in general. One of the one of few successes, like probably the biggest success I had out of those nine books, was my Azure networking cookbook. That was initially it was published by Pact Publishing, but after some point it was publishing rights were acquired by Microsoft, who gave the book out for a free download, and um, it has tens of thousands of downloads so far, and it was also translated to 15 different languages.
Brilliant, brilliant work, Mustafa. It's nice to hear that. And also, we would like to understand you are an experienced techie, along with that being an author, providing so much information to the community. What would be the your single tip that you would give to the beginners who are entering into Azure? It can be anything related to Azure CAF or in general about Azure.
Okay, so one thing that that's a tough one. I would probably could be able. It would be easier to do a list, but take opportunity of all the online materials that you today have. Back in the day when I started my IT career, things were quite different, and online stuff was not that available overall. And if you wanted to do something, it was basically very hard to come by materials. It was usually acquiring some book with 500-600 pages that you need to go through and figure things out. Today there's so many materials available, so take advantage of that, continue learning, and never stop, because that's one thing in IT: you can never stop. Whatever you learn today, it might become obsolete tomorrow, and you need to keep pushing and learning all the time.
Yeah. So, we would also like to know about your interest on this MVP journey. So, what inspired you to bring this particular journey in place?
Well, to be honest, it's not something I planned, and I think that's the only way you can be a successful MVP over the years. I enjoy doing stuff for the community. I enjoyed sharing my knowledge, my experience, stuff I did. So I started writing blogs, started speaking at local events, and it kind of grew from there. Microsoft MVP is a community award. It's
Yeah.
awarded for your community contribution to for helping community, and I think that's my passion for community was that big that I contributed enough to be awarded MVP for the first time, and it just continue ever since. And I've never planned to stop that part. Even if I'm not MVP tomorrow, I would continue doing what I'm doing. I would still speak at the conferences. I would still share my knowledge, still share my experience with others, and that's the only way I know how to do it.
That's the amount of energy you translated to the audience as well. That was an amazing session with you, Mustafa. Very brilliantly put what was needed for the audience, very crisp and clear. I was very happy to host you on the show. Had a wonderful talk with you.
Cove.co